$5 million says you can't do it, Sterling. The penthouse party overlooking Central Park buzzed with the city's elite, but all eyes snapped to Richard Sterling and his smirking rival Sullivan. Richard, heir to a media empire, thrived on control. Sullivan, a Wall Street shark, loved to poke the bear. Money buys anything, right, Sterling? Sullivan taunted, swirling his martini. Prove it. Marry someone beneath you, someone who wouldn't normally darken your door. Stay married 3 months. Transform her. Make everyone believe it. Laughter rippled through the crowd, thick with champagne and cynicism. Richard's jaw tightened. Ridiculous, he scoffed, but Sullivan's grin widened. 5 million says you're too scared to try. Scared you can't actually mold the world to your will. Sullivan gestured across the room, his gaze landing on a figure near the catering station. Mary, a new hire, quietly cleared glasses, her uniform stark against the glittering gowns. Her, Sullivan declared. Your maid. Marry her. Transform her. 5 million if you fail. Richard stared at Mary, her head bowed, focused on her task. A maid? It was absurd. Yet, Sullivan's challenge, the public spectacle, ignited a dangerous pride. Deal, Richard snapped, shaking Sullivan's hand, the grip hard, the stakes higher than just money. This was about dominance, about proving Sullivan and everyone else wrong. 3 months, Sullivan gloated, and make it believable. Galas, society events. If it's fake, you pay up. Richard's eyes narrowed. I don't lose, Sullivan. Get ready to write that check. The next morning, the Sterling estate kitchen hummed with early morning activity, but Mary jumped as Richard's voice cut through the clatter. Mary, we need to talk. She turned, dish soap dripping from her gloved hands. Richard Sterling in her workspace. Yes, Mr. Sterling? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, the scent of his expensive cologne filling the small space. I have a proposition for you. Proposition? Mary's heart pounded. I want you to marry me. A plate slipped from her grasp, shattering against the tile floor. Marry you? She stammered, disbelief warring with a flicker of fear. Richard pulled out a check, the amount eye-watering, and placed it on the counter. A contract. 3 months. Marriage of convenience. This solves your financial problems, right? Mary stared at the check, then back at Richard. Years of struggling, of bills piling up, flashed before her eyes. Why me? She asked, her voice tight. Richard's gaze was cold, calculating. You're unexpected. No one would believe I'd choose you. That's the point. His brutal honesty stung. She wanted to refuse, to walk away, but the weight of her family's debts pressed down. And after 3 months? She asked, the words catching in her throat. Divorce, no strings, you disappear, but you'll be set for life. Mary took a shaky breath. It was a deal with the devil, selling herself. But maybe, just maybe, it was her only escape. I accept, she whispered, the words feeling like a betrayal. Richard's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Excellent. Tomorrow, you're Mrs. Sterling. Mary watched him leave, a chill settling over her. She had stepped into a gilded cage, but hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered within her. The Sterling estate buzzed with hushed whispers. Richard, home early, formally dressed, and then Mary, summoned. By the ancient oak in the gardens, Mary knelt, gathering fallen leaves, the damp earth scent grounding her. Mary, Richard's voice startled her. She stood, brushing dirt onto her apron, a smudge she hadn't noticed. Mr. Sterling? His gaze was different today, sharp, expectant. Everything's ready. City Hall in an hour. City Hall? It was happening, the absurd proposal becoming terrifying reality. An hour? I need more time. Richard tilted his head. Time for what? You agreed? I don't wait. Panic tightened her chest. She could still back out, but the memory of her cramped apartment, the constant worry held her captive. Sighing, she nodded. All right, I'm ready. The black limo felt like a coffin. Richard, oblivious, tapped on his phone, his world miles away from hers. Mary watched the city blur, a world of luxury she'd only glimpsed from the sidelines. We're here, Richard announced, snapping her back. City Hall loomed, imposing, indifferent. Inside, lawyers waited, staff discreetly avoiding eye contact. Papers were thrust at her. Her hand trembled as she signed. Mary, maid, becoming Mrs. Richard Sterling. Congratulations, Richard said, shaking the registrar's hand, then turning to Mary, a cold smile plastered on his face. Husband and wife. Not really, Mary murmured, her voice lost in the sterile air. The limo ride back was colder, the silence heavier. The estate was different. New drapes, softer lighting, a staged perfection. Your room, Richard announced, stopping before a door, opening it to reveal a bedroom of obscene luxury. Velvet, silk, a walk-in closet the size of her apartment. Beautiful, she managed, the word hollow. Satisfied? Richard asked, his tone indifferent. Remember, you're my wife now. People must believe it. Mary crossed her arms, defiance rising. And what exactly do you expect, Mr. Sterling? Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by her steel. Play the part. Elegant dresses, perfect posture, no impulsiveness. Mary laughed, a short, sharp sound. Appearances. That's all that matters, right? Richard frowned, but didn't deny it. Wardrobe arrives tomorrow. Stylist, too. Mary sighed, the weight of it crushing her. Fine. Your game, your rules, but don't expect me to disappear. Richard shrugged. Your choice. Just stick to the deal. He left, leaving Mary alone in the opulent prison, tears stinging her eyes. 3 months. Just 3 months. Downstairs, Richard walked with purpose. Mary unsettled him. She wasn't like the women in his world. It bothered him, this unexpected complication in his perfectly controlled game. A knock, soft but insistent. Before Mary could answer, the door opened, revealing a woman sculpted in tailored perfection. Mrs. Sterling, the woman said, a professional smile fixed on her face. Clara, your stylist. Assistants trailed behind, laden with racks of designer dresses. Appearance is paramount, Clara stated, surveying the room. Mr. Sterling wants you appropriately attired, Mary scoffed, still in her pajamas. Appropriately attired for what? A puppet show? Clara remained unfazed, arranging dresses. Necessary or not, it's what he desires. Let's make the most of it. Mary sighed. Fine, let's get this over with. Hours later, Mary descended the grand staircase, a silk gown clinging to her, jewels cold against her skin. Richard waited below, in a leather armchair, tablet in hand. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Not bad, he commented, his tone flat. Thanks, I guess, Mary retorted, arms crossed. Richard stood, adjusting his tie, ignoring her sarcasm. Dinner tonight. Friends. Be ready. Dinner? Mary's eyes widened. You're telling me now? Now, Richard stated, as if it were obvious. Mary sighed, exasperated. Fine, but don't expect me to be someone I'm not. A ghost of a smile touched Richard's lips. Just don't embarrass me. That's all that matters. The restaurant dripped with excess, a stage for the city's elite. As Richard and Mary entered, a wave of stares washed over them. At their table, Sullivan waited, a shark's grin plastered on his face. Well, 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 Sullivan drawled, his eyes raking over Mary. Mrs. Sterling. Impressive, Richard. Truly. Mary's cheeks burned, but she met Sullivan's gaze head-on. Thank you, Tom. And you, do you always dedicate so much time to judging other people's lives? The table went silent, Sullivan choked on his wine, and Richard's lips twitched. The dinner was a blur of superficial chatter, Mary acutely aware of being dissected, analyzed. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. Leaving the restaurant, Mary exhaled, relief flooding her. That was interesting, she said, looking out the car window. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. You handled it well. Mary turned, surprised by the unexpected compliment. Thanks, I guess. Richard gave a curt nod, then fell silent. He had underestimated her. It was unsettling. Days bled into weeks. The estate routine, initially alien, began to feel almost normal. The staff, initially wary, warmed to Mary's quiet kindness. Richard watched from a distance, a puzzle he couldn't solve. One night, documents spread across his office desk. He heard a soft knock. Mary stood in the doorway, a teacup in her hand. You look like you could use a break. She entered without invitation, her boldness surprising him. And you think you can tell me what to do? Richard challenged, raising an eyebrow. Mary shrugged, placing the cup on his desk. Doesn't hurt to try. He picked up the cup, inhaling the herbal scent. Thanks, he murmured, after a moment's hesitation. Mary sat, her gaze drifting to the scattered papers. You work a lot. Someone has to, Richard replied curtly. Mary smiled faintly. Even so, you should rest. Richard looked at her intrigued. Her simplicity, her genuine concern was unnerving. You're different, he blurted out, before he could stop himself. Mary tilted her head. Different how? I don't know. Richard shook his head, pushing the thought away. Just different. Mary laughed softly. I guess I'll take that as a compliment. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Good night, Richard. Good night, Mary, he replied, his gaze lingering on her as she left. He leaned back, the teacup still warm in his hand. An unfamiliar peace settled over him, a feeling he couldn't explain. The next morning, Richard summoned Mary to the garden. A table was set under the oak, laden with books, silverware, crystal, a notepad. Clara stood nearby, and beside her, an elegant woman radiating authority. Mary frowned, approaching cautiously. Richard turned, his expression impassive. Mary, this is Ms. Davenport, he announced, indicating the woman with gray hair. Etiquette specialist, daily lessons starting now. Mary's jaw dropped. Etiquette lessons? Seriously? Completely, Richard stated, arms crossed. You need to know how to behave at events. Leave nothing to chance. Mary scoffed, incredulous. Of course, nothing more important than looking perfect for the people you want to impress, right? Exactly, Richard replied, ignoring the sarcasm. Miss Davenport, begin. Mary knew she was trapped, but she wouldn't make it easy. She sat at the table, arms folded. All right, teach me how to be perfect then. The lessons were an exercise in frustration. Miss Davenport, with her unwavering composure, demonstrated wine glass etiquette, utensil protocol, graceful walking. Mary, in turn, accidentally dropped forks, mispronounced French phrases just to gauge Richard's reaction. Mary, Miss Davenport sighed for the 10th time as a spoon clattered to the ground. Focus, please. I am trying, Mary replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Richard, observing from the patio, narrowed his gaze. Mary, this is necessary. Necessary for whom? Mary challenged, her gaze locking with his. For you? I'm perfectly fine as I am. Richard's gaze hardened. Necessary for both of us. I don't make bets to lose. Mary scoffed, but picked up the spoon. Despite her rebellious act, a part of her wanted to learn, not to please Richard, but to prove she could on her own terms. As days passed, the lessons became less grating, the basics absorbed. Her relationship with Richard, however, remained a tightrope walk. One evening, during dinner, Richard's eyes were fixed on her, scrutinizing every bite. Aware of his gaze, Mary deliberately placed her fork and knife perfectly on her plate, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. Satisfied? She asked, her tone sharp. A ghost of a smile touched Richard's lips. Admittedly, you're improving. Well, Mary retorted, a hint of irony in her voice. I'm a dedicated student. Despite the teasing, a shift had occurred. That night, Richard seemed to see beyond the surface, beyond the bet. He was starting to see her strength, her intelligence, beneath the carefully constructed facade. Richard took Mary to her first real test, a charity brunch hosted by Clarice Beaumont, a society doyen. Mary, in an elegant blue gown, entered the room beside Richard, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. Clarice, radiating practiced charm, approached, a polite smile plastered on her face. Richard, darling, and who is this lovely lady? Clarice, Richard said, a forced smile mirroring hers. This is my wife, Mary. Clarice's eyebrows arched, surprise flickering before she masked it with a cordial handshake. A pleasure, Mary. Richard never mentioned he was married. Mary smiled, acutely aware of the undercurrents. The pleasure is mine. Throughout the brunch, Mary felt the subtle scrutiny, the silent questions. Who was she? How did she land Richard Sterling? Instead of shrinking, she used it as fuel. When Clarice steered the conversation to philanthropy, Mary spoke honestly. Helping others shouldn't be limited to events like this. It's something we can all do, daily, in small ways. The room stilled. Richard, about to interject, paused, watching. Guests murmured, impressed. An interesting perspective, Clarice conceded, raising her champagne flute. Richard, your wife has much to teach us all. Pride and relief mingled within Mary. She had navigated their world on her own terms. Back at the estate, Richard stopped Mary in the hallway. You were impressive today. Mary raised an eyebrow, surprised. A compliment? Yes, he admitted, a faint smile playing on his lips. You won them over, even though you're different. Mary chuckled, crossing her arms. Maybe because I'm not trying to be like them. Richard looked at her, a new light in his eyes. Maybe that's why they're so intrigued. Mary glanced away, a flicker of unease. Well, I just said what I thought was right. Keep it up, Mary, Richard said before turning away. He disappeared upstairs, leaving Mary in the hallway. For the first time, she glimpsed something beneath Richard's carefully constructed armor, something hidden, even from himself. The game had shifted. Neither was prepared for the twists ahead. The forced intimacy revealed cracks in their carefully constructed walls. Despite the barbed exchanges, Richard sensed an invisible weight Mary carried. One evening, he found her in the garden alone on a stone bench, a small notebook in her hands. She flipped through pages, a melancholic air about her. Late, Richard said, his voice breaking the silence. Mary startled, quickly closing the notebook. Couldn't sleep. Neither could I, he replied, walking closer. What are you reading? Just something of mine, she said evasively. Richard sensed her retreat and didn't press, but curiosity gnawed at him. The notebook held a key to Mary, a secret he wanted to unlock. The next day, Mary helped in the kitchen, but Richard's thoughts were elsewhere. The image of her in the garden, the notebook, replaying in his mind. Shortly after lunch, while Mary was downstairs, Richard found himself drawn to her room. He hesitated, then opened the door. On the dresser, beside wilting flowers, lay the notebook. He picked it up, carefully turning pages. Sketches, notes, a diary, doodles of flowers, landscapes, fragments of text, thoughts. One page stopped him. Two small children holding hands with a woman. Below, a note. I promised to protect them, no matter the cost. Richard frowned. Children? He knew nothing of Mary's past. That evening, dinner was strained. Richard watched Mary, his unease palpable. Why are you staring? She finally asked, setting down her fork. Do you have siblings? He asked, ignoring her question. Mary froze, then recovered, her composure returning. Why do you ask? Just curious, he replied, revealing nothing. Mary averted her gaze, a shadow crossing her face. Two younger brothers, they're fine, I hope. You don't talk to them? Richard pressed gently. Mary sighed, placing her fork down. Not much to say. Years since we've been in touch. They live with an aunt, another city. Richard sensed the pain in her voice, but refrained from pushing further. He knew there was a deeper story, one that required patience to uncover. Days later, while Mary was out with Clara, Richard called Marcos, his assistant. Find out everything about Mary, he instructed, handing over a photo. Anything specific, Mr. Sterling? Marcos asked, curious. Family, past, anything she's hiding. Richard avoided Marcos's gaze, a pang of guilt twisting in his gut. Understood. Report back soon. The next morning, a dossier landed on Richard's desk. Marcos's report on Mary. He read in silence, the weight of each page pressing down. Humble upbringing, sole caregiver for two younger brothers after their parents died in a car crash when she was only 17. 2 jobs, lost custody because of instability. Richard felt a tightening in his chest, imagining her struggle. Among the documents, an old photo. Mary, younger, radiating hope, holding 2 small boys, her brothers close. That night, he found her in the garden, on the same bench. He approached cautiously, sitting beside her. I need to ask you something, he began, directly. Mary looked at him wearily. What now? Why haven't you mentioned your family? Mary's lips tightened, surprised. That's none of your business. Maybe not, he conceded, his tone gentler. But I read about what happened. Mary's eyes widened. You read what? I needed to know who you really are, Mary, Richard sighed. And now I do. She stood abruptly, arms crossed, her voice rising. You think you can just invade my life? My story isn't some game for you to explore. Mary, I'm not playing. Richard stood too, his voice firm. I wanted to understand why you're so guarded, so closed off. And now I do. You fought alone for so long you believe you can't trust anyone. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. You don't know anything about me. I know you lost everything, Richard said, his voice softening. And yet you never gave up. That's more than I can say for most people I know. Mary stood silent, staring at the ground. I know I can't change the past, Richard continued, but I want you to know, at least while you're here, you're not alone. Mary looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she saw genuine emotion in Richard, a flicker of something real. Thank you, she whispered, before turning back toward the estate. Richard stayed, gazing at the star-dusted sky. For the first time in years, a crack of understanding, of connection, opened in his carefully constructed world. The night was cold, the estate unusually quiet. Mary, in her room, watched the city lights, the luxury around her amplifying her loneliness. Her conversation with Richard about her past echoed in her mind. A soft knock startled her. Richard stood there, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his posture. "Sorry to bother you so late," he began, his voice low. "But I need to talk." Mary raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his uncharacteristic vulnerability. "About us." "This situation," he gestured vaguely. She stepped aside, letting him in. Richard paced, gathering his thoughts. He turned, arms crossed, and began, "I know I pressured you into this, and I haven't exactly been kind." Mary tilted her head. "Is this an apology?" A crooked smile touched Richard's lips. "Maybe. I'm not very good at this." She watched him, curious. "Why now?" "Because," he admitted, his voice lower, "I've realized you deserve more than I've given you." The sincerity in his voice resonated, chipping away at her anger. "Respect. Respect is a start," she conceded finally. Richard nodded, relieved. "Can I stay for a while?" "If you promise not to critique my simple furniture," she replied, a hint of humor returning, a genuine smile touching his face. As the night deepened, they sat on the floor, sharing a bottle of wine Mary had hidden away. Conversation flowed, surprising them both. Richard spoke of his childhood, a rare vulnerability, the pressure, the emotional vacuum of his wealthy upbringing. "My mother always said love was a distraction," he confessed, swirling his wine. "Relationships are business deals. Expect a return." Mary chuckled softly. "Explains a lot." "Don't be so quick to judge," he said, a tired smile playing on his lips. "I'm a product of that, but sometimes I wonder how things might have been." Mary observed him, trying to see beyond the armor. "You can still change, Richard." "You think so?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Anyone can, if they want to," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. Richard's gaze softened. "What about you? What would you change if you could?" Mary fell silent. "I wish I'd been stronger. Maybe my brothers would still be with me if I'd fought harder." "Mary," Richard said firmly, holding her gaze, "you did everything you could. Don't blame yourself." "Easy for you to say," she murmured, looking down. Richard leaned closer. "You're the strongest person I know. And if no one's ever told you that, I'm telling you now." Tears welled, but Mary held them back, managing a faint smile. "Thank you, Richard." In the days that followed, their relationship subtly shifted. The teasing remained, but a layer of understanding, of respect, had formed. One afternoon, in the garden, Mary tended flowers when Richard approached, a relaxed air about him. "I need your help." Mary turned, surprised. "Help? With what?" "Important meeting tonight. Think you should come." She raised an eyebrow. "You want me at a business meeting?" Richard nodded. "You're my wife. Remember? And," he added, a slight smile playing on his lips, "your perspective might be valuable." She paused, considering. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but don't expect me to be a silent accessory." "Wouldn't expect anything less," he replied, amusement glinting in his eyes. That evening, at the meeting, all eyes turned to them. Mary, however, held her head high, Richard's presence a solid anchor beside her. When an investor questioned the ethical implications of a project, Mary, to everyone's surprise, spoke up. "With all due respect," she began, her voice clear and steady, "profit and ethics don't have to be mutually exclusive. Financial success shouldn't compromise our values." Silence descended. All eyes turned to her. Richard beside her couldn't suppress a proud smile. The meeting leader, a seasoned executive, nodded slowly. "An interesting perspective, Mrs. Sterling. I'd like to hear more." Richard looked at Mary, admiration washing over him. Back at the estate, Mary collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Richard entered, hands in pockets. He watched her for a moment. "You were incredible tonight." "Thank you," she said, a tired smile touching her lips. "Not just flattery," he continued. "You have something special, Mary." She looked up, surprised by his sincerity. "Richard, what's happening to you?" He laughed, sitting beside her. "Maybe you're changing me." A faint smile touched Mary's lips, but she remained silent. Something was shifting between them, something profound. Weeks blurred, Richard decided it was time. The elite ball, the pinnacle of New York society. Mary, however, recoiled at the mention. A ball? Are you serious? She asked, her coffee cup rattling in her hand. Important event, Richard explained calmly. My wife, you'll be noticed. Mary scoffed, crossing her arms. Richard, I can barely handle dinners. A ballroom full of judging eyes? I'll be a target. He shrugged. They'll judge, but you don't have to care. You're not there to please them. Then why am I going? She asked, her voice tight. Because, Richard said, sincerity in his voice, it matters to me. Mary was silent, realizing for the first time Richard wasn't demanding, he was asking. All right, she conceded finally, but if anyone insults me, I'm responding. A slight smile touched Richard's lips. That's all I expect. Ball day arrived. Clara and her team descended, transforming the estate into a whirlwind of fabrics, jewels, and makeup. Mary, in a shimmering silver gown, felt like an imposter. Stunning, Clara declared, adjusting the hem. Mary gave a hesitant smile, barely recognizing her reflection. Doesn't feel like me. Clara gently took her hands. The dress is different, but you're still you. Don't forget that. Mary nodded, taking a deep breath. Courage. She needed courage. Descending the stairs, Richard waited in the hall, tuxedo impeccable. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over her, his breath catching. Breathtaking, he murmured, his tone genuine. Mary blushed, glancing away. Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself. Richard offered his arm. As she took it, she felt like stepping into another dimension. The ballroom glittered, chandeliers blazing, music swirling. As Richard and Mary entered, silence fell, then a low hum of whispers. Mary's stomach clenched, but she lifted her chin, remembering Richard's words. They're all staring, she whispered, leaning close. Let them, he replied calmly. They've got nothing better to do. A faint smile touched Mary's lips. The evening began, a parade of introductions. Some were polite, distant, others openly condescending. Vanessa Belmont, tall, blonde, radiating ice charm, approached, ignoring Mary completely. Richard, darling, Vanessa purred, hand on his arm. And who is this distinguished young lady? Mary's jaw tightened. Before she could react, Richard stepped in. Vanessa, this is my wife, Mary. Vanessa's eyebrows arched, feigning surprise. Of course. A pleasure, Mary. The pleasure is mine, Mary replied, composure unwavering. Vanessa tilted her head, assessing Mary like prey. You know, Mary, this world takes courage. Not everyone can handle it. Mary offered a sweet smile, her eyes sharp. Thank you for the advice. I imagine it's difficult, especially for those who try too hard. Richard suppressed a laugh as Vanessa recoiled, visibly stung. When the music shifted to a waltz, Richard extended his hand. Shall we dance? Mary hesitated, glancing around. I'm not very good at this. Neither am I, he smiled. Let's pretend. He led her to the dance floor. As they moved, Mary felt surprisingly at ease, Richard a steady presence beside her. You're doing well, he murmured, guiding her. Maybe because you're not stepping on my feet, she teased. Richard chuckled, and for a moment the judging eyes, the glittering facade faded away. Later, as Mary rested at their table, Sullivan approached, a cruel smile playing on his lips. So, Mary, he began, dripping sarcasm, enjoying your role as the perfect wife? Mary crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. Quite well, thank you, Tom. Sullivan laughed, a harsh, unsettling sound. Admit it, you're doing better than expected. But tell me, he leaned closer, his voice dropping. How long do you think it'll last? Mary felt anger rise, but held it back. Tom, what exactly are you trying to prove? Me? Nothing, he feigned innocence. Just fascinating how Richard found someone so unconventional. Before Mary could retort, Richard appeared, a hand firm on Sullivan's shoulder. Enough, Tom. Sullivan shrugged, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Richard. Just a little fun. Richard's gaze remained stern until Sullivan retreated. He turned to Mary, his expression apologetic. Sorry about that. No need, she replied, her voice steady. I can handle people like him. Richard looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. I know you can. Leaving the ball, relief washed over Mary. In the car, city lights blurring past, she turned to Richard. Why did you really bring me here? Because, he answered without hesitation, I wanted them to see you." A faint smile touched Mary's lips. She said nothing more, but for the first time she felt Richard saw her, truly saw her, beyond the game, beyond the bet.